I welcome you to this special service. This is a time for us to settle down, settle in, to build community together. This day, this Mother's Day, is a unique one where we come with different... Oh, Ave, guys, I think there's something going on with the screen. Today the past is drawing near. If you seek, we will appear? What is that? What is that about? If you sing with all your heart, the time machine you will start? Okay. We don't know where that came from, Odie? All right, well then we better sing. That sounds interesting, and we better sing with all our heart because I would like to see a time machine. How about you? The circle. That heart worked. That time machine worked. Look who's appeared. I know you. You're Julia Ward Howe. Today, many people know you. Well, let me just watch this, Julia. Okay, ready? Glory, glory, alleluia. Glory, glory, alleluia. Glory, glory, alleluia. The truth is marching on? Truth is marching on. Your writing of the Battle Hymn of the Republic lives on, and we know you for starting Mother's Day, which is today.
That's right. Although I have to say, I do have to add that I later renounced the militarism of that song as I founded Mother's Peace Day. In my time, I was a poet, lecturer, and social activist. I was a dedicated peace activist, an abolitionist, and a suffragist. And this is my friend, Mary Livermore.
I am proud to have been a teacher, author, wife, mother, Army nurse, soldier's friend, lecturer, and reformer.
Yes, Mary, the history of many justice movements is filled with your name. And Frances Watkins Ellen Harper?
It is me. I was born free in this state. One thing I have to say, and I was proud to make a living as a writer in my time, and I am proud of my activism alongside these ladies, like Reverend Olympia Brown.
Wow, Olympia Brown, I grew up in a church named after you. You served it in Racine, Wisconsin.
Are you a fangirl?
Fangirl.
I was the first woman ordained with full denominational authority in 1863, and eventually I left ministry to pursue the cause of women's right to vote full time.
Well, welcome to this congregation. I think a round of applause. A lot has changed in the last 200 years since you all were born. Yeah.
Women have full equality under the law?
Well...
And people of color no longer face discrimination.
Well...
And we've finally stopped sacrificing humanity to war.
Well...
And churches accept the full authority of women leaders.
Well, yeah, we do. Yeah. So we still have work to do. But Unitarians and Universalists have now officially joined together, and we have this symbol of our shared faith. Would you come stand around it? This is our flaming chalice that we light every week to ground us in our community, and that its flame might be a beacon of hope. Would you all please light our chalice together? can tell it's going to be a special day. Today, our choir pieces and our hymns are written by women, and most of the words that you hear from our guests are their words historically. Today is Mother's Day in the United States. President Woodrow Wilson declared the first National Mother's Day in 1914, but it was over 60 years in the making, starting with mothers' clubs working to lower infant mortality rates, which then grew to care for wounded soldiers during the Civil War. Long before Mother's Day became filled with flowers and chocolates and 4-year-olds peering out from the pulpit, it was born of the desperation of women who had lost sons in the Civil War. And it was inspired by this woman right here. And Julia, I wonder, would you share your Mother's Day proclamation?
I'd be honored. This was published in Boston in September 1870. Arise then, women of this day. Arise then, women who have hearts. Whether your baptism be of water or of tears, say firmly, we will not have questions answered by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands will not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We, the women of one country, will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure them. In the name of womanhood and humanity, I earnestly ask that a General Congress of Women without limit of nationality may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient and the earliest period consistent with its objects, to promote the alliance of different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international conflicts, the great and general interests of peace.
My dear friend Julia, so inspiring. It was only a few years later that you and I would attend the first International Congress on Women's Rights in Paris, France. Witnessing the horrors of the Civil War and the incredible work of women during that time, it changed me. In my autobiography, I reflected that I saw how women are degraded by disenfranchisement, and in the eyes of men are lowered to the level of the least among us and are put in the same category with them. And with their own infant children, the possession of the ballot by woman can alone make her the legal equal of man. And without this legal equality, she is robbed of her natural rights.
My friends, we have been in a fight for the abolition of slavery and the right to vote for women for too long. In 1866, I gave a speech before the National Women's Rights Convention demanding equal rights for all, including Black women. I remember saying, we are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest or feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul.
Oh, how we have inspired and supported each other. And how grateful I am our Unitarian and Universalist churches have been institutions of encouragement and transformation. There is a reading here in this hymnal taken from a sermon I delivered on a return trip to the Racine Church years after my ministry. Stand by this faith, work for it, and sacrifice for it, There is nothing in all the world so important to you as to be loyal to this faith, which has placed before you the loftiest ideal, which has comforted you in sorrow, strengthened you for the noble duty, and made the world beautiful for you.
It is so wonderful to have you all with us today. And Julia, I know that all of you women value children and educating the next generation, but Julia, you were one of 6 children and then had 6 children of your own, right?
Yes.
Wow. And you kept the company with prominent Unitarian ministers in your time, like Theodore Parker and James Freeman Clark and William Lloyd Garrison, right?
That's right. I did. For me, it was important to have my Unitarian faith based on the leadership of Jesus, which makes each man the brother of all, and God the beneficent Father of each and all, the religion of humanity. This was the inspiration for my work for justice.
It is so inspiring to have you with us, Julia, and I could just sit and hear more about all of your work and your abolitionist work and your women's rights work and your peace work, but I do wonder if you'd like to join the children and youth today in their programs.
Oh, yes, I'd be delighted.
Well, before you go, on your 91st birthday, a reporter asked you for a motto for the women of America. Do you remember what you said?
Up to date.
Well, let us all bless the future generations in song. With love will guide us. Today we are highlighting these Unitarian and Universalist foremothers who were leaders in peace and justice movements, and certainly there are many women who have shaped history and have not made it into the books. Today, what a joy it is to see these contemporaries of each other, particularly active in the second half of the 19th century. They were remarkable women who led vital social and church reforms, and it is clear that these women and other foremothers of our faith had far-reaching influence on shaping post-Civil War America. Though the context of their struggles and their stories has changed significantly, the lessons of the groundbreaking work of these women is a powerful reminder of how far we've come and what work still needs to be done. Mary Livermore was ahead of her times, not only as a woman, but as an engaged and dedicated social activist. She challenged herself personally and courageously took up those challenges to the larger community. She valued education, family, and religion from an early age. She was born into a Baptist family in 1820 and had a crisis of faith when the death of her younger sister challenged her beliefs about salvation.
Happiness and I had parted company forever, unless in some certain and assured manner I could be convinced that my sister Rachel was not among the lost.
She was unwilling to accept things as they were in the Baptist tradition, and yet not ready to reject the faith that had been important to her, so she learned Greek to study the Bible for herself and began her journey. In 1839, she moved to Virginia to tutor for a family on their plantation. She was horrified to witness slavery. She could not accept the institution of slavery and its implications for society. She was struck most about the degradation of the enslaved people and also that of the slave owners. The whole system was void of humanity. She returned to New England in 1842 to begin to find her voice as she told of her experiences and objections.
I had suffered so much during my first year on the plantation from a personal knowledge of the horrors of slavery. Since I could do nothing to change the condition of the enslaved people, I protected myself from further suffering during the remainder of my stay. I determined to know nothing more of discipline nor of the sales. I had seen enough of slavery to believe that any deed of cruelty or darkness was possible under its regime, enough to enable me to detect instantly the realism of Uncle Tom's Cabin as I read the weekly chapters in the columns of the New Era, in which it was first published. The whole system is wrong, and sometime, please God, it will be abolished. Such was my thought. I returned to New England home, a pronounced abolitionist, accepting from no one an apology for slavery, for I had seen it myself. I became a subscriber to The Liberator, which I read with great regularity until the slaves were emancipated and the paper discontinued. I attended every accessible anti-slavery meeting, and as a matter of conscience, I always added my contribution to the funds of the society, for this I had promised myself to do, when steeped to the lips in horrors on the Virginia plantation.
The young adult Mary returns to New England, and it is then that she discovers Universalism and met her husband, Daniel Livermore, a Universalist minister. Mary finally found a church doctrine that mirrored her own beliefs. Everyone was free and equal in the eyes of God, and the Universalists were dedicated to making that true on earth. She became involved in the work of the church while becoming a wife and a mother of 3. She wrote, published stories, and began taking a public stance on the issues she felt passionately about. In 1860, the family moved to Chicago, and she was a writer and editor for the Universalist paper, The New Covenant, which her husband owned and edited. At that time, in 1860, she was the only woman reporter at the Republican nominating convention where Abraham Lincoln was nominated. She was not shy to be there, nor to admit her skepticism of the country lawyer for president. As the Civil War broke out, though, she grew to deeply respect Lincoln. And in fact, she would later secure his handwritten and signed copy of the Emancipation Proclamation for a fundraising auction that sold at the time for what's the equivalent of $100,000.
Philanthropy is one of the most hopeful characteristics of our time.
Throughout the Civil War, as a member of the U.S. Sanitary Commission, she nursed soldiers, wrote letters for them, and organized relief supplies while making trips to Washington and developing fundraising plans. After the Civil War, the temperance debate was especially meaningful for Mary. Veterans coming home from the Civil War have what we now know was PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and at the time was called soldier's heart. Too often, that condition was self-treated with alcohol. And Mary Livermore and other women leaders saw women and children completely vulnerable to distant, disengaged, and often physically abusive husbands, fathers, and sons. As with the question of slavery abolition, she was focused on the implications for the good of society. The temperance movement wasn't a stand against alcohol. It was a stand instead against what had been created in society because of it. She challenged the whole system to be more loving.
For humanity has moved forward to an era when wrong and slavery are being displaced, and reason and justice are being recognized as the rule of life.
Mary emerged from these experiences as a national figure, and in 1869 she established a women's newspaper and became involved in the suffrage movements for both women and African Americans. For 25 years, she made a career of being a public lecturer on women's rights, history, religion, and women's potential influence on society. Again, it was society that Mary saw at stake in all the work she did. At the time of her death, her friend Julia Ward Howe wrote that Mary Livermore was a prophetess of a new and better society in which dwelleth righteousness. Mary Livermore and Julia Ward Howe and Frances Allen Watkins Harper and Olympia Brown all found common cause in supporting the 15th Amendment, which granted suffrage to black men, but not to women. On the other side of the suffrage question, prominent leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton campaigned for women's suffrage first, using the slogan, "Women first and Negro last." Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was an African-American born in Baltimore in 1825, and as she introduced herself, born free, and what a thing she has to say, born free in this state. And while she was not a victim of slavery, she wrote and spoke about experiences in ways that undoubtedly brought change. She was a published poet and writer and considered the first black woman to make a living from writing. Her poem, Songs for the People, lives on today.
Let me make the songs for the people, songs for the old and young, songs to stir like a battle cry wherever they are sung. Not for the clashing of sabers, for carnage nor for strife, but songs to thrill the hearts of men with more abundant life. Let me make the songs for the weary, amid life's fever and fret, till hearts shall relax their tension and careworn brows forget. Let me sing for the little children before their footsteps stray, sweet anthems of love and duty to float o'er life's highway. I will sing for the poor and aged when shadows dim their lights, or their sight, for the bright and restful mansions where there shall be no night. Our world, so worn and weary, needs music pure and strong to hush the jangle and discords of sorrow, pain, and wrong. Music to soothe all its sorrow, till war and crime shall cease, and the hearts of men grow tender, girdle the world with peace.
Frances was affiliated with the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and then later in life with the Unitarians, particularly because of their work on the abolition movement and Underground Railroad. In 1858, she refused to give up her seat to ride in the colored section of a segregated trolley car in Philadelphia 100 years before Rosa Parks. She spoke openly about the harsh realities and struggles of being black and of being a black woman in this country. One of her most famous poems, "Bury Me in a Free Land," she wrote after she got very sick on a lecturing tour. The last stanza is,
I ask no monument, proud and high, to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in a land of slaves.
The stanza of the poem is now on the grave marker. It's also inscribed on the wall of the Contemplative Court, the space for reflection in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. In 1870, Frances Harper joined the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia with her daughter. She was an active member there, and she found support and friendship in her justice work there. She continued to organize around black women and encouraged female writers and journalists, and helped organize the National Association of Colored Women in 1894 with Harriet Tubman, and Ida B. Wells. She understood that she might not live to see the change she was working for, but she held faith that things could change.
Apparent failure may hold its rough shell, the germs of a success that will blossom in time and bear fruit throughout eternity.
When Frances died in 1911, her funeral was held at the Unitarian Church in Philadelphia, and she is buried at the African American Eden Cemetery there. In 1992, African American UUs installed a new headstone at her grave. And as the youngest of our four women, Olympia Brown, born in 1835, would be the only one of them to cast a ballot. While studying at Antioch College, she heard a speech made by the anti-slavery campaigner Francis Gage.
It was the first time I had heard a woman preach, and the sense of victory lifted me up. It felt as though the kingdom of heaven were at hand.
She was called to ministry in that moment, and she was rejected from several theological schools until finally she got a somewhat discouraging acceptance note from the Divinity School at St. Lawrence University, in which the president of the school hadn't actually expected her to show up.
His discouragement was my encouragement.
She pursued ordained ministry, and at the time, the Universalists conferred ministry ordained people by regional bodies, not just by congregations like the Unitarians did. And so Olympia Brown was the first woman ordained by a body like that in 1863. In 1869, she, as a Universalist, addressed a group of Unitarian ministers, asking,
Has woman any place in the church? If so, how is the place to be determined, and what should be her position in relation to the cause of truth in religion? It has been said that the character of Jesus was essentially a feminine character. It foreshadowed a new type of manhood in which the test of excellence should be no longer physical strength, but moral power and spiritual discernment. Christ, possessing all feminine characteristics, ushering in the reign of gentleness and peace, was at once the representation of man and woman. Like the great infinite being whose vicegerent earthly representation he combined all the excellences of male and female character in himself. And his system made no distinction of sex in respect to the sphere of labor or moral obligation.
Olympia Brown was married and had 2 children and kept her maiden name. Her husband was John Henry Willis, and her son was a prominent economist who actually designed the Fed. So you'll have to look him up. As an old woman, Olympia Brown burned President Woodrow Wilson's speeches in demonstrations as they were seen as only lip service to the suffrage movement. And at age 85, she was one of the few original suffragists to vote in the 1920 presidential election.
The grandest thing has been the lifting up of the gates and the opening of the doors to the women of America, giving liberty to 27 million women, thus opening to them a new and larger life and a higher ideal.
These women's stories speak to the power of one person to truly create change. And in Unitarian and Universalism, these women found a faith, our faith, which holds that all souls are equal and we all must call for a more just world. In this living tradition, it is every person. It comes in and out of a church. It is all of you, all of us who shares beliefs and values and influences with each other, changing the way we understand the world. There is a foremother in each of us. Even if we are not women or mothers, we have the opportunity to take up the call of these women to continue the fight for freedom and equality grounded in our faith tradition. We are all parents of the next generation, leading by example, supporting education and free thinking, and amplifying the voices that need to be heard. We'll sing again, "We are a gentle, angry people." Please rise in body or spirit.
Of what significance is it that we are left behind in the race for wealth if we carry in our heart joy? What if our bodies be plainly clad, if only our souls be arrayed in garments of light?
If we have had no past, it is well for us to look hopefully to the future, for the shadows bear the promise of a brighter coming day.
Loyalty to right, truth, and duty must be the rules of our lives. If we wish to know the highest peace, the completest satisfaction, to live with respect for ourselves and as helpers to the struggling, straying, sorrowing world.
We extinguish this chalice in honor of all of those who have nourished the light of truth and compassion in our growing minds and hearts. Their flame continues in each of us. I say a special thank you to our fabulous staff, Chloe and Aaliyah and Brenna and Carla. And also, how about our rhythm section today? Don't you think they just need a little...